It's a landscape that is ever evolving. New buildings go up, old buildings come down across Toronto's skyline. And while some towers promise to shake up the city's pedestrian urban appearance, others seem symptomatic of urban planning gone awry. Tonight, joining us now to help examine the successes and failures of this evolution, Joe Barrage, partner at Urban Strategies, Inc., Cheryl Tilak-Singh, professor of sociology at Ryerson University, Lisa Rochon, architecture critic at the Globe and Mail, and Philip Preville, freelance writer and journalist. Want to remind you that producer Meredith Martin and online producer Naveen Vaswani are hosting a Twitter chat right now, so join our conversation using the hashtag AgendaTVO. Good to see you all back here at TVO. Nice to have you here. I want to start by just showing you a few slides, because I know you all know this, but for people watching us outside Toronto who may not have seen the proposals, if you would control them, let's bring these up. Here is the Frank Gehry, David Mirvish proposal, not for condos, but for sculptures. King Street West, from John Street going east to the Royal Alexandra Theatre, which we all know more than 100 years old, approximately a block and a half in length. Those three new skyscrapers are the anchor of the new proposal. Here's what Toronto would get. 2 new museums featuring abstract art, the collection of David and Audrey Mirvish, from their studio, and display space for the Ontario College of Art and Design, OCADU as they call it now. And Toronto would get 3 80-story condo buildings built over several years. 80 stories. And one more, that's what would go. The Princess of Wales Theatre, a 20-year-old theatre, fairly modern. David Mirvish says there's too much theatre capacity space in the city anyway, so he is prepared to tear that down and exchange it for the new proposal. Let's go around the table on this. Lisa, when you first saw this, what'd you think?
Well, of course, I was shocked to hear that the Princess of Wales was coming down, but David Mirvish owns it. That's his decision. And when I looked deeper at the proposal and the schemes and the team, I thought, this is exceptional urban development.
Was that your first thought when you saw it?
Yeah.
It was, okay.
Yeah, looked at the team, looked at the development, looked at the podium art house at the base, and thought, unlike all the kind of typical banality that we're seeing consistently in Toronto within its condo market, this was something that had a promise of something a little bit more intelligent with a lot more sculptural qualities and integrity to it ultimately.
Joe, what did you think when you first saw the plan?
I must admit, I guess I was kind of stunned, because I think what it encapsulated was the fact we all know a huge change has been going on in Toronto. All of a sudden, 80-story buildings, used to be 40-story buildings were controversial, now 80-story buildings seem standard. And what this project encapsulates essentially is that we've actually changed hugely as a city. We are not this old city of neighborhoods that we used to be. We are a thoroughly modern, almost an Asian city, sometimes downtown, a Shanghai, a Singapore.
So dense and high.
Dense and high, and a very different place. And I think we haven't quite figured out what the language of that place is and what the vocabulary of that place is. Undoubtedly, as Lisa says, Gehry, Mirvish, it doesn't get better than that. They're trying to give us some clues. But we really have to have a big conversation about, what kind of city, wonderful city, equivalent of the neighborhood city, can we create with all of this density?
Cheryl, when you first saw it, what did you think?
Well, it seemed to be consistent with a lot of the other sort of cultural institutions and the changes we've been seeing in downtown Toronto. So when you think of Gehry, you think about an iconic piece that's going to come into the city. It's going to draw people to Toronto. It's going to take that whole entertainment district and add another set of locations that are going to be internationally well known. And so in that sense, I thought it was really sort of significant. On the other hand, when we look at the number of units that are going to be sort of put in there in terms of the condominium development, whether or not that area really can sort of sustain that number, and then part of, I guess, the discussion we're going to get to is how much change does that area actually need.
You are going to segue us very nicely into all of these themes as we go along. Okay, Philip, when you first saw it.
My first thought, because I heard about it on the radio, so I didn't see it, and I just wondered how on earth he'll sell all the units in the condo market that we've got. With sales on the decline, I thought to myself that this is a spectacular project, I wondered if the timing was off.
Well, for the record, he said he's not going to build towers 2 and 3 until he's sure that there's a market for it.
Well, fair enough. I think that and of course with all condo projects now, they all have to be pre-sold before they get built in any event. But I wondered if it might be longer in the making as an entire project than we might wish.
Just to that end, there are, people don't believe this when I tell them this, but there are more cranes in the skies of this city building condos than in any other city in North America right now.
By a factor of 20.
It's
not even a minor factor.
Let's bring the pictures up if we can, because we're going to show, for, again, for people who don't see the Toronto skyline every day, we have half of our viewers outside the city. Here's the city going back to 1998, and you can see that it is a fairly, the CN Tower, of course, is there, and the Sky Dome, of course, is there. Everybody recognizes that, but that's now. That's 2012, and look at all of these buildings that have sprouted up ever since 1998. Once again, back in time. And let's come forward in time and look at all those condominium buildings. Joe, from an aesthetic point of view, do we like the look of that?
Well, the answer is oddly, I think, yes and no. I actually rather like this sort of pyramid, this cluster, this dense pack of density that we've got in the central city. And from afar, it actually looks pretty good. Where it's having trouble is when you get down at the street level, and I'm not sure that we are actually creating a public environment that is the equivalent of the high-rise environment we've got. I mean, clearly, people want to live here. I mean, this is the thing that I don't particularly want to live on the 80th story, but obviously a heck of a lot of people do. People are pouring into the downtown. We're talking about 100,000, 150,000 people coming into the central city. This is undoubtedly a hugely good thing for the city and for urban planning and for sustainability and everything. But we better make sure we do it right so that we're actually creating a decent world for all of those folks to live in.
A good thing, Lisa, if we have the infrastructure to support it all and we can make it livable, presumably, yes?
One of the #1 concerns that people have in Toronto right now is public transit, the lack of public transit. There's a serious concern about affordable housing, the lack of public space, amenities, delightful public parks in the city proper. So I think actually the urban culture of Toronto and what it is to live in Toronto has accelerated greatly, and there's, I think, a very wonderful sophistication about living in increasingly dense urban environment. And frankly, I think a lot of people enjoy height. I don't think the height is the issue. It's how do these buildings meet the ground, as Joe was saying, and how can they make a more gracious connection to the sidewalk, to the streets, the way that so much of New York City does. And frankly, what concerns me about our accelerated urban growth is not height, but our very seriously lagging public transit and issues around embracing social inclusion rather than pushing people out.
Philip, the look of it. How do you like the look of that skyline?
Well, I like the look of the skyline. I think one of the most amazing things about those images that you showed is the way in which all of these condos have changed our relationship to the Gardiner Expressway. 20 years ago, our civic conversation was centered around the Gardiner, that the lands surrounding it were a wasteland, that this was the Gardiner's fault, that it needed to be put down to grade. What we've discovered is, as Joe said, people want to live there. This turned out to be highly valuable residential real estate. I don't think anyone imagined that. And I think it's changed our civic conversation, and I think that if we do get the street level right, that there are ways of making a seamless transition from the downtown into the waterfront without tearing down the Gardiner. It's not the barrier that we thought it was, I think, in the end.
Cheryl, it wasn't that long ago people were looking at some of those condos on the waterfront and saying they are an appalling blight on the waterfront of this city. You look at that picture, that time-lapse photography, do you think that today?
Well, we've gone through a major transformation in terms of the type of work that we're doing in the economy, which I think is being reflected in what we see downtown. So we've moved from being an industrial city to essentially post-industrial city where we had a lot of abandoned buildings, not a lot happening downtown. And now we're really seeing the spatial manifestation of globalization and new economy workers that are moving downtown. So as Toronto becomes a global, continues to emerge as a global city, People want to be close to their new economy jobs, and the brownfields are gone now, and the memory of what those spaces used to be like have also disappeared.
Joe? To pick up on that, what's fascinating is that there's a very interesting dynamic between the condo world and the employment world. What's less understood is that there are 4 big million-square-foot office buildings being built right now, and plans for quite a lot more in that same corridor south of Union Station. And you ask the people, why are you building these big office buildings here? And they say, because our workforce lives here. And so it's a very happy relationship. Canada is having done so well relatively in the banking financing crisis of the last 5 years, means that business is thriving. So we're actually, I think, going to see some diminution of the rate of condo development, but actually not the kind of crash by any means that we've seen elsewhere, because the economy that underlies them is still pretty strong.
And I think it's no longer enough to expect from a city like Toronto, or frankly any major city around the world, that you work downtown but you live elsewhere in the inner rings. You are now given the opportunity to live downtown, but also to be able to walk to work and to shop. And so without ever actually getting on the streetcar or taking a car, just the pleasure of being able to walk or cycle to your place of work is fantastic.
And it's a given that a healthier city is a city where people live closer to where they work. Is that right?
That's right.
That's
we're obviously building, I think, on the boards now 150 condos in Toronto. Lots of opportunities to live downtown. Lots of wonderful neighborhoods that ring the downtown as well. Places where you can have a bungalow with a front yard, backyard. But equally, the idea now is, how do we celebrate flow, urban flow within the city of Toronto? We still need to figure that out.
Philip, you keep an eye on City Hall, and I want to know if there's anybody down at City Hall. I don't mean this to sound as naive a question as it may sound, but is there anybody down at City Hall who keeps a very close watch on what kind of thing gets built and where?
Well, individual councillors have a tremendous amount of say over what gets built in their ward. But at the same time, developers, if they own the land, if they control the land, if what they want to do meets zoning, there's not a lot that City Hall can do to stop someone from building something. Not that anyone would want to necessarily. I think everybody at City Hall understands that the city needs to grow vertically. I think that's where it's headed. Obviously, it's been headed that way. But there's also a lot of advantages for individual councillors when it comes to development in their ward, because there are special parks grants and Section 37 grants.
Section 37 grant? What's that?
It's monies dedicated to specific community projects in exchange for additional density within their building. I think if I've stated that correctly.
So in other words, we'll let you build 10 more floors on this condo if you build a park, build a school, do whatever.
And what's wonderful about that for any local councillor is that it's fast money. It's fast money compared to trying to build a community centre out of general tax revenues. The money comes from development in your ward, it stays in your ward, you get to decide or have a big say in deciding how it gets spent. And it gets spent fast and things go up quicker.
Lisa just mentioned there's 150 cranes in the sky in this city right now. And Cheryl, let me bring you in at this point and talk about who it is that's going to be living in all of these places. What kind of an impact do you think the condo boom has had on who actually lives in the downtown of Ontario's capital city now?
Well, I think it's great for, those that are ages like sort of 25 to 35, right? They're, just graduating, getting started, right?
So it is overwhelmingly young people?
That's where the bulk of the demographic is going to come from. That's the fastest growing demographic as well, right? So you talk about the offspring of the baby boomers. So they're, when they're looking to buy something or to rent, because I think another issue that we're going to have to talk about is a lot of the units are actually going to be leased.
So somebody will own them and then rent them out to somebody else?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think the numbers are now going to be as close to 50% of the units are probably going to be leased. So that provides a good opportunity for someone to get into the market or for their parents to buy it and for them to move in. And I think we're also going to see some empty nesters who are also going to see it as a great opportunity to, no longer deal with, having to care with their homes and things like that. So I think there's going to be an interesting, potentially some NIMBYism happening in terms of some conflicting interests about how condos get defined, and that's going to relate to issues of condo boards potentially and governance about...
Hold that thought, we're going to get to that. Is this an unambiguously good story? 25 to 35-year-olds moving into the downtown in such large numbers?
Simply, yes.
It is.
There are lots of complexities that are going to come. There's no question. I mean, it's an interesting point. One of the reasons that all these buildings are so tall is because nobody was objecting to them. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, when they start to fill up, and everybody's neighbors, it's like the buildings at Yonge and Eglinton that all the neighbors around objected to. Mm-hmm. Well, you'll start to get that kind of NIMBYism happening, which is actually a good thing because it's showing in a funny way that there's a real community maturing in those buildings. Mm-hmm. I don't think. Particularly the big dense packed clusters of condos have really settled down yet as to who's there and who's there permanently, who's there temporarily. Mm-hmm. I mean, oddly, the city doesn't really know. Nobody knows who's living in those buildings. Somebody needs to do a really good count and figure that out, a census. Mm-hmm. But
is it problematic if half the people are renters as opposed to owners? Is that problematic?
Well, half the people in the city are renters. I mean, I think it's actually, in a strange way, it's a kind of privatization of the rental market. We're not getting any affordable rental housing built by anybody. No rental housing at all being built. So
is this stuff affordable?
The stuff that's being rented out is actually being rented out at market, and it's much more affordable probably than moving in to buy it. Yeah. Huh. So
I think one of the issues is you have a lot of offshore investments, as you might in a city like Vancouver, where there's sort of empty units in like 75% of a lot of the condos in Vancouver are really empty and vacant.
They're investments
for people who do not live there. In Toronto, a huge number of people are pouring into the condos. Yes, many of them are young. I think a lot of them will be aging boomers who want to be able to live and shop and be downtown. To me, some of the other issues have to do with the sustainability of these towers, the cheapness of a lot of the construction. How well are they going to endure? Are they actually going to start falling apart in 15 to 20 years?
Let me ask you about that, because you see what's going downtown. We're 15 minutes north of downtown right here. You see what's going up at this corner. You got lots of new condominiums being built at the corner of Yonge and Eglinton. Do you see a significant difference between what's being built down there and what's being built up here?
There's sort of a formula for Toronto of condo design. It's largely to do with window wall construction, green glass, sometimes blue grass. Typically low iron glass is more expensive. Curtain wall construction, which flexes independently of a building, which has a greater lifespan, is more expensive, typically is saved for commercial building, not used for all of these 150 condo towers now on the boards. So there are issues around formula of design. It's sort of like we're building the generic suburb in the sky. And that, all of the accusations that we could level around the sameness, the formulaic design of the suburbs, now I think I could level towards a lot of the condos which we're now seeing in Toronto.
Are you seeing that too, Joe?
Yeah, I think there is a worry here. It's been a little bit pile them high, sell them cheap, although they're not being selling them so cheap. And as Lisa says, there's such competition. There's so many of these buildings that they are built in a very formulaic way. I mean, that's why they go straight up, is because you just repeat the construction process all the way up. I think we actually have a very good buildings department, very good inspection department here, but we are picking up some issues. There are windows, there are things falling off these buildings, and I think we're probably going to see that an increasing problem as we go down the years.
Philip, for people who are watching us outside of the capital city right now, who have no idea how much these things cost, can you give us a range of what you'd have to pay to get a two-bedroom condo or a one-bedroom condo in the city?
Well,
of these new ones.
These new ones. Well, I was just as I was coming here, I saw 1,800 square feet for $800,000. That's the going rate right around the corner from here.
That's not typical, is it?
I'm not sure if that's typical.
It's got to be high end.
Right?
I hope that's high end.
I mean, roughly, stuff in the downtown dense pack is selling for about $600 a square foot. So if you have a 1,000 square foot building, you're looking at $700,000 for it.
The average condo resale in downtown Toronto, I believe, according to news reports this week, was at around $357,000.
That's the average.
Yes.
For a condo.
And that's the average for a condo.
For a one-bedroom condo?
It's an overall average. But
It might be worth it, though, if you can save yourself an hour commute outside of Toronto to a house which might be cheaper, but you know, I think we have to factor in what is the value that we might place on our own quality of life, and to live downtown where we can walk, shop, work. Might actually have a lovely premium.
Might not need a car. You don't have to buy gas, insurance,
but the size of the
stuff.
units
Many
are
great
also
things.
getting really small, right? So that's where the affordability
smaller
is being sort of promoted, and particularly around Liberty Village, it's very lifestyle oriented, right?
It's in the West End near the exhibition.
Heading towards along sort of part of King down around the former that industrial space that was there. And those units are really small in there, but they've put in all of the amenities that are going to be appealing to young urban professionals. You've got the yoga studios and the Starbucks and the TTC and everything.
Well, when you talk about two-bedroom condos, there's definitely not enough of them. A demand for two-bedroom condominiums outstrips the supply.
How about three-bedroom condos? Anybody building those?
No.
No?
Some of the biggest units are actually being built right now in Regent Park, which through the programs of grandfathering, you are now having 4 to 5 bedroom units being built by Toronto Community Housing Corporation.
But that's a public institution, though.
It's a public.
There are no private developers putting up three-bedroom condos?
There are very, very few. I mean, and one of the things that the city is thinking about doing, and that other cities have done, which is quite clever, is actually to make sure that when you build 2 small one-bedroom units next door to each other, you actually can knock out the wall in between them. And I think we're going to actually see that becoming city policy, because the city's worried about the fact that we're just getting an average of 550, 600 square foot, which is, a really, really small thing. But if you're able either to buy 2 or in the fullness of time to convert the 2 next door to each other into a decent unit, that would be a very helpful thing to do.
But I think we have to also remember that in cities like Tokyo or Paris, 650 square feet is ginormous, right? Where in Tokyo, you might have quite typically units going up right now at 250 to 300 square feet. And so for people, young urbanites who are partying hard, who are working hard.
Never home, in other words.
Right. They're having fun.
It's a place to sleep, and that's it.
Yeah, and they're adjusting, and a lot of them are happy.
Philip, you wanted to say?
Oh, just that the problem with the smaller condos is, of course, families and children. And I think that's the biggest challenge to the cultural shift of living vertically. I think people still see condos as a place that they stay until they have children, and then they go and they look for a bungalow or a semi-detached somewhere. And that's been the formula in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada for a long time now. And convincing families who are, parents who are raising young children to raise them downtown, to raise them on the 60th floor in a 2-bedroom condo is I think the biggest cultural challenge.
Well, Cheryl, does the city need to tell developers, maybe not the 60th floor, but you have to build more 3-bedroom condos on the 4th, 5th, 6th floor, because there are families who do want this experience?
Well, if they want to think about having a diversity of people living downtown, then they definitely need to think about different family types. It's kind of interesting. There hasn't been research to look at this in more detail, but I would suspect that most new immigrants are still going out to the suburban regions when they arrive into the city, and aren't being particularly drawn to the condo towers, unless of course they're coming from a culture where that is part of the dominant way of living. But a lot of people are seeing, when they come to Canada, there's a sense of ownership and belonging by owning property in a house that's associated still with a single family house. So yeah, having a variety of housing types is really important, and then to have the amenities and the institutions like schools and things like that that are going to support people as they have families.
Let me circle back to something Lisa said a little while ago about the kind of glass and whether it was safe and all of that was being put up right now. And Philip, I'll get you to react to that. Do you like both the color, the type, the safety of the kind of glass condominiums that are going up right now?
I do think that they look terribly alike. You know, when Lisa talks about a monoculture, I agree completely. And what I find humorous is when you read marketing material for condominiums, you know, they were inspired by Tuscan villas or Beat Generation novels, but they end up looking exactly the same once they're built. But the other concern is also the quality of the construction. They're going up awfully fast.
Well, you did a big piece for Toronto Life magazine on this.
I did.
Did you find any examples of dubious construction practices?
I think what I found were an awful lot of lawsuits between condo corporations and their developer over construction shortcomings in the buildings. It was hard to find people to talk to me about the problems in their building because they're all concerned about the resale value of their condominium. But certain problems emerged. The window walls are definitely a problem. They often don't fit well to the building, and that poses a problem in terms of if they ever would need to be replaced. How does that happen? When you're living collectively in a condo, I think that'll be one of the challenges that people face.
Joe, does it look to you like they're going up too lickety-split?
I think that we should have some concern about the long-term sustainability of some of these as well. And I think I'm not sure whether this is sort of a greater buildings department scrutiny or what, but you know, we are now creating a city almost the size of Montreal, dropping it in downtown Toronto, and we should probably have a bit of concern about you know, how well that's being done, how well we're not Montreal, but a couple of 100,000 people, and how well that's being done, and whether that's really going to last 20, 25 years. Remembering these condo corporations are not, they're not fully developed social or community organizations. They're jammed together very quickly, and so sustaining one of these lawsuits is not the easiest thing for them to do.
Let me go to Lisa and pick up on something you just said. These are corporations, right? These are kind of businesses. And you have people who are living in these buildings, who are running these condo corporations, who are not necessarily trained business people or you know, aware of all the intricacies of the Condominium Act of Ontario and all of this. Do we have a governance model problem with this right now?
Well, I think we really do because, first of all, these are spec buildings, right? Yes, they're pre-sold to people who buy the pretty, sexy marketing pictures and kind of get seduced by the idea of their building. But they have no idea about the energy bills that are to come because of faulty window wall systems. They have no idea about, you know, collapsing glass balustrades on the street, or heat sinks and having to always pull their blinds because the heat is so overwhelming within their unit. And I think, you know, like on a larger level, a lot of these condos discourage basic social ideas within a very large-scale urban building type.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is they're tall, and if we're starting to build more and more 70-story towers, we have several on the boards right now in Toronto, 80 stories, we have to really figure out, and I think the city has a role here, how do you create meaningful interactions at the 10th story, at the 20th story, 50th story? Maybe they're connecting gardens. They're starting to look at those in Seoul and in Singapore. We need to sort of think about that. To me, a city is not produced, it's created. Great cities are created. And so the imagination needs to be brought to bear on all of these condos. It's a little bit late for Toronto in terms of what we're now building, but this is a conversation. I mean, this is one of my problems with Toronto. These serious conversations should have been had 20 years ago. And the city planners are scrambling right now to put together tall building guidelines that are still to go to council. So scrambling, ad hoc planning, that's one of the Achilles heels of Toronto.
What do you think of the relationship, you know, as Lisa says, trying to get people on the 80th floor to relate to people on the ground floor? There's one condo that's decided to put a pool on the 30th floor.
Yeah.
Does that work?
I don't know, and I actually don't know that anybody knows. I mean, it's a long journey to work and home when you're going up and down. It is. I mean, seriously, it's a long ride. And should we be having, as some people are doing, putting these bridges in the middle, these horizontal units? You can see that some of the waterfront condos are doing that, and some of the City Place condos, they've got a bridge across at about the 20th floor. I don't know, but I do think we ought to think about it a little bit. This is when the elevator becomes a street, in effect, we know how we should be planning streets that are horizontal. Should we be planning streets that are vertical somehow?
Okay, we got 5 minutes to go here, excuse me, and I want to, let me put this out on the table for our final question. It's a bit airy-fairy, but Philip, get us started here. What do you hope Toronto looks like in 25 years' time? What kind of qualities?
Well, I hope, first of all, while we're talking about all these condo towers, I hope they all are well maintained. I don't think that all of them will survive as condominiums. I don't know what the future holds for some of them. Some of them already, even some of the new ones down by the Gardner, are in terrible shape.
If they're not
financially,
condos, what are they going to be?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if they end up being apartment buildings, if they end up being community housing, what they end up being. But I think one of the things the city will probably have to think about is how to transition some of those particular buildings that fall into that situation, how they'll transition them into something else that is useful and productive for the city. I also think that we need, I hope that the city of Toronto 25 years from now downtown has another hospital, probably along the model of St. Michael's Hospital. That's a teaching hospital, but also one that has a special mandate to serve disadvantaged communities in the city.
You know that people living north of Steeles Avenue right now are reaching for their television sets and saying, you guys have already got 6 hospitals on University Avenue, you want another one in downtown Toronto? With all the population north of Toronto that wants hospitals?
And I completely understand the way they feel, but Joe just said we're putting a city the size of Montreal down there by Union Station.
Cheryl, what do you want the city to look like in 25 years?
I think kind of continuing along that vein, I would also become sort of concerned about that many people living that closely together.
In terms of social harmony?
Yeah. How well are people going to get along? And that in terms of issues of policing and social regulation, I don't think we have started to think about how do we police spaces that are actually sort of extending upwards, right? So they learned a lot of lessons from places like neighborhoods like Regent Park and other neighborhoods that, the way in which you develop the space has a lot to do with the social issues that evolve from the neighborhood. What happens when the space is then taking a significantly different form? So I think that is going to become an issue. Again, if it ends up being a very homogeneous population, then that is going to create unintended forms of segregation in other areas in terms of if people aren't able to access housing, where are they going to be forced to live, and what sort of pressure is that going to make on the outlying neighborhoods?
Joe, what do you want Ontario's capital city to look like in a quarter century?
You know what, it's actually what I want it to feel like is the most important thing. I think it's feeling now like a really extraordinary place. I mean, I travel a lot, and I keep coming back to it, and more I'm struck by the fact that this is actually one of the most unique places in the world. It's not the most beautiful place, and I don't think it will be or probably can be, but it's got a buzz and a vibrancy and an activity and a liveliness, and all of that terrible provincial dullness seems to have dissipated. And I think that feel is going to get stronger and stronger. We're actually going to be quite surprised, especially some of us longtime Torontonians, by quite what a remarkable city is kind of brewing, hopefully very successfully on the streets of this new condo world.
They don't lock up the swings on Sunday anymore.
They don't
in
lock
this
up
city,
the
do they?
swings any longer.
And it wasn't that long ago they did that.
Absolutely, and it's fascinating. The other buzz of this city, and a lot of the points that Cheryl's making are very important. This is actually the city that seems to have pulled off social harmony, social peace and good government and order, probably better than any other big city in the world. If that, and we love it. And keeping that going will actually make us an even more extraordinary place over the next decades, I think.
Lisa, why don't you take the last 30 seconds and tell us what you want.
It's got to be a wonderful, wonderful piece of art. And it's got to function, yes. We've got to figure out public transit. We've got to figure out urban flow. But it's got to be like a masterful work of art in which all of these peoples from around the world are given a voice, and this wonderful collective society and its aspirations are given buildings that match the aspirations of a great society.
Well, we are happy to have given all four of you a voice on this program tonight so we could talk about this issue. Lisa Rochon, the Globe and Mail's architecture writer. Philip Preville, freelance writer and journalist. You can read his piece about the condo market in Toronto Life. Joe Barrage from Urban Strategies, Inc., Cheryl Tilak Singh, professor of sociology, Ryerson University. Thanks so much, everybody.